A sharp scream tore through the quiet morning. It echoed across the grand lobby of Stone and Pierce Financial Group, where light danced on marble floors, polished to a mirror shine, and where everything from a breath to a smile was measured by net worth. It was the kind of place where every suit was pressed so perfectly it shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, where the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the rhythm of power heels, and then through that pristine, almost sterile perfection, a man in a grey hoodie walked through the revolving glass doors. He moved calmly, unhurried, as if he couldn't hear the quiet sighs of disapproval around him. Marcus Reed, 39 years old, once called the silent investor by Forbes, but that morning no one knew his name. In worn sneakers and frayed jeans, with a face that radiated quiet ease, he looked like a lost delivery man. No one looked closely enough to notice the eyes, the kind that made seasoned CEOs sit up straight. The receptionist, a blonde with her hair tied neatly and eyes as cold as glass, looked up with a professional smile so polished it felt fake. "Delivery," her voice sliced through the air like a blade across ice. Marcus smiled slightly, not the kind meant to impress, but the smile of someone with nothing left to prove. "No, I'm here for the executive floor." For 2 seconds the entire lobby froze. The receptionist gave him a once-over, before turning back to her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. I can wait." From the corner, 2 security guards began to approach. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his tone dry and clipped. "So the delivery entrance is in the back. This area is for clients and executives only." Marcus kept his calm gaze. "I'm not making a delivery. I'm here to see someone." Silence. Then the guard clenched his jaw and signaled to his partner. "What's your name?" "Marcus Reed." The receptionist's fingers tapped her keyboard. Her brow furrowed. "You're not on the schedule." "That's fine. I'll wait." His voice was soft, but there was something in it that made people pause, like a single stray note breaking through a symphony. He stepped back and sat down on the leather bench, quietly. No phone, no laptop, just observant eyes. No one there knew that 6 days earlier, his company Reed Capital Holdings had purchased the entire Stone and Pierce Financial Group in a deal worth over $3.2 billion. But Marcus hadn't come to flaunt power. He came to see people, to study how they treated someone they thought didn't belong. He had told his advisor, "I don't want reports. I want to see how they look at someone who isn't wearing a suit." And now he was watching that truth unfold, clearer than any data sheet. 10 minutes passed. The elevator doors opened, and out stepped Richard Hale, 48 years old, Chief Operating Officer, Harvard MBA, a man with eyes like blades and a smile sharpened by 100 corporate conferences. When the receptionist told him, "There's a man here asking to go to the executive floor," he glanced at Marcus as if looking at a stain on the carpet. "You're in the wrong place," Richard said. Marcus replied quietly, "No, I'm right where I need to be." Richard smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You should leave before security has to do it for you." The air grew thick. A few employees stopped walking, watching the exchange like a play about arrogance and power. Marcus stood, meeting Richard's gaze. It wasn't defiant, just steady like a mirror. "I'll wait," he said again. Richard nodded, curtly, muttered to the receptionist, "If he's still here in 5 minutes, call security," then walked off, his polished shoes striking the marble like punctuation marks of superiority, leaving behind a man in a hoodie, sitting still calm, the eye of a storm no one saw coming. Marcus unlocked his phone and typed a note. Observation 1 from receptionist to management behavior reflects hierarchy. Disrespect toward those who don't display status. Begin documenting corporate culture. He sent it to himself, then turned the screen off. The chandelier light caught his face, making it glow like fire beneath calm water. Behind that stillness was a tide. Marcus remembered his early days in finance when he was rejected from an interview because he didn't fit the brand image. When he'd heard people talk about diversity as a slogan, not a value. He knew what it felt like to be judged by what you wore. And today, he wanted those same people to taste it for themselves. A young woman passing by whispered to her co-worker, "He doesn't look like someone who could afford coffee here." Marcus heard her, but didn't react. He smiled, one of those smiles you couldn't tell was forgiveness or irony. Outside, snow drifted down like ash. Inside, the suits kept walking, confident, careless, blind to the test unfolding in real time. Near noon, Marcus rose and walked toward the glass doors, sunlight catching his face. He paused, looking back at the lobby, the place where he'd just been dismissed, the place that in a few days would become the stage for a reckoning. In his eyes there was no anger, only a silent promise I won't need to shout for them to hear me. I'll let them see themselves. As the door closed behind him, the people in the lobby went back to work, unaware they had just sent off the new owner of their company. A test of ethics and of humanity had just begun. The next morning, Chicago was draped in cold mist. Sunlight glimmered against the glass walls of Stone and Pierce Financial Group, turning the skyscraper into a giant mirror that reflected everything, even the things people tried to hide. Among the steady stream of suits and briefcases, Marcus Reed appeared once again. Same grey hoodie, same worn sneakers, but this time he wasn't just observing. He was listening. As he passed a group of employees chatting near the coffee counter, their casual laughter revealed harsher truths than any quarterly report ever could. She's smart, sure, but a bit too ambitious. If she played nice, she'd move up faster. Haha, you mean she should let the guys handle the presentation part? The laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus paused, his eyes darkening for a moment. Just a few careless sentences had painted the entire picture. Here, talent alone wasn't enough. You had to fit the mold, the gender, the color, the tone. He sat in a corner of the pantry, opened his notebook and wrote, Observation 2, an image-driven culture masking a hierarchy of exclusion. Smiles that wound, silence that survives. He closed the notebook. He didn't need more proof, he needed authenticity. Someone real, someone unafraid to be human in a world built on facades. And then he met her. Olivia Brooks entered the conference room like a quiet gust of wind. No flair, no theatrics yet. When she spoke, the entire room fell silent. On the screen glowed a sea of data everyone had long given up on, but Olivia restructured it, with precision turning chaos into clarity so seamlessly that Marcus found himself looking up. She spoke with steady confidence, though her eyes held humility. We can cut transportation costs by 12% if we reroute our distribution network, and profits next quarter could double. For a heartbeat silence, then Todd, the operations manager, gave a small, patronizing laugh. Great idea, Olivia, but maybe let the executive team review it later. That single word later was gentle enough to bury an entire effort. Olivia simply nodded, unfazed, as though she'd long grown used to being sidelined. Marcus glanced around the table, stoic faces, a few fake nods. He knew this wasn't the first time, And he also knew that in every company there was always someone like Olivia, more capable, more dedicated, yet perpetually unseen. During lunch, Marcus found her in the break room, pouring coffee from a pot that had gone cold hours ago. "Coffee here is terrible," he said lightly, almost joking. Olivia chuckled a rare, genuine laugh in a place full of polite pretenses. "You're not used to the company's signature, black despair water." "Huh, not really. But I heard your presentation this morning. The logistics model was solid." She froze slightly. "You were there back of the room. They call me Jacob." "Long story." Olivia smiled faintly. "Thanks. But it doesn't matter much. My ideas don't usually go far." "Why not?" She looked down at her cup, her voice fading into quiet resignation. "Because they don't come from the right person. And I don't look like someone who gets heard." Marcus studied her face. In her eyes was exhaustion, not of defeat, but of faith slowly eroded by years of being overlooked. "How long have you worked here?" he asked softly. 5 years. And I've trained 3 men who are now my bosses." She said it without bitterness, just calm sadness. Marcus nodded slightly. "I see a pattern." Olivia tilted her head. "You're not in operations, are you?" "No." "Then what do you really do?" Marcus smiled, that same ambiguous smile that could mean either humor or truth. "I work in a field that lets me see who still does the right thing when no one's watching." She fell silent for a moment, then offered a short, knowing smile, the kind that belonged to someone who'd been hurt enough to still choose grace. "Then look closely. Around here, everything wears a mask." Marcus watched her walk away. Small frame, steady stride. He took out his phone and typed a single note. Observation 3 overlooked talent. The issue isn't lack of skill, it's lack of vision. Internal culture audit required. That afternoon, Marcus walked past the 18th floor hallway, where a large poster hung promoting the company's leadership development program. Beneath the slogan, "Opportunity for Everyone," were 10 faces, all of them white men. At the center stood Richard Hale, arms around 2 young employees like a king distributing glory. Marcus exhaled softly. His suspicions were no longer abstract. They were printed proof of hypocrisy. Meanwhile, inside Richard's office, a call was underway. "We checked the system," Mr. Hale said Charles from IT over the speakerphone. "Someone with high-level access has been reviewing shareholder files and internal data logs. It's not an employee." Richard shot up from his chair. "Can you trace it?" "We tracked it to a temporary login. Username Jacob." Richard's brow furrowed. The name brought back the memory of the man in the hoodie. "Lock the access, print all logs, and notify HR." He sat down again, fingers tapping on the desk. In Richard's world, power was never meant to be shared, and anyone unfamiliar was a threat. By late afternoon, Marcus left the building. The setting sun hit the glass facade, reflecting his image alongside Richard's silhouette from the upper floor. 2 men, 2 worlds, one testing one, preparing to strike. Marcus knew the game had just shifted to its next phase. He took out his phone and messaged the investigation team at Reed Capital Observation Phase complete. Manipulative figure identified. Prepare Phase 2. Begin tracking employee Olivia Brooks. She'll be the key indicator. As the message sent a cold yet resolute feeling spread through him. Each step he took down that corridor carried the echo of a question he'd wrestled with for years. Does justice exist if we don't force it to show its face? The evening wind swept through the lobby, carrying the scent of burnt coffee and the distant laughter of those unaware that tomorrow this building would become the epicenter of a moral earthquake. And somewhere on the top floor, Richard Hale stood by the window, watching the man in the hoodie disappear into the city streets. He didn't know his name, but instinct told him the man wasn't there just to wait. A storm was forming, not loud, not flashing, just the silence before everything falls apart. Tuesday morning. The air inside Stone and Pierce Financial Group was thick like fog. But this fog didn't come from the weather. It came from suspicion. On the 21st floor, inside a brightly lit office, Richard Hale sat, leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. He was waiting for a call, and that alone was enough to make the entire executive team hold their breath. The phone rang. "We've confirmed it," Mr. Hale said. "Charles, the head of IT. The user named Jacob accessed shareholder data audit reports and personnel files. It's not an internal employee." Richard opened his eyes. A slow, cold smile crept across his face. "And you're telling me he used admin access?" "Yes." "From an unregistered account. Excellent. Send me all the logs and don't tell anyone." He hung up and leaned back again. In Richard's mind, the puzzle pieces had begun to fit together. The name Jacob sounded familiar, and then the memory surfaced the man in the hoodie that morning. His calm, strange composure, not at all like someone looking for a job. Something was off. "All right," he murmured. "If you want to play, I'll teach you how this game really works." Across town, Marcus Reed sat in a small cafe by the river. The pale morning light reflected off the wooden table beside his open laptop, displaying Stone and Pierce's internal data. On the screen, columns of numbers and access logs spread like the veins of a massive system. He was studying the flow of projects, spending channels, and the hidden patterns of power buried within them. A message appeared from the Reed Capital team. "Hale has begun checking internal access." He might be suspicious. Marcus smiled. "Good. When those in power feel safest, that's when they make the biggest mistakes." He closed the laptop and stood up. Today he wasn't coming as Jacob anymore, he was coming to listen to whispers. And at Stone and Pierce, whispers travelled faster than dividends. Around 10 o'clock, Olivia Brooks was sorting files in the operations room when a message from HR popped up. "Olivia, please stop by the HR office at 10:30 for a quick discussion regarding data compliance." She froze. "Data compliance," she muttered. All her reports had been filed by the book. She couldn't understand what was happening. When she entered the HR office, the atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating. A young staffer, Kelsey, greeted her with a nervous smile. "Hi, Olivia. This is just a routine review." "Review of what exactly?" Kelsey glanced at the paper on her desk. "Someone reported that your account shared certain internal files with a third party." The room fell silent. Olivia felt the blood rush to her face. "What we're not sure yet. But Mr. Hale has requested a closer look." In that instant, Olivia knew she'd been set up. Meanwhile, in the lobby downstairs, Marcus was chatting casually with a security guard. His voice was light conversational. "Things seem tense around here lately, huh?" The guard chuckled. "Yeah, someone's being investigated for leaking internal data. Heard it's from logistics." Marcus went still. His eyes darkened. "Logistics?" "Yep, name's Olivia. Something." Marcus's chest tightened. He looked out the glass window, watching snow begin to fall, white, pure, fleeting. He closed his hand, his calm gaze sharpening with resolve. Richard had just made his first move. That afternoon, Olivia found Marcus by the vending machine. "Did you hear?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes filled with fear and anger. They're accusing me of leaking data. HR says I could be suspended. He exhaled slowly. Who reported it? Richard Hale. Marcus stayed silent for a moment, then said, You did nothing wrong. And they know that? It doesn't matter, Olivia snapped, her voice breaking. Here all it takes is one accusation for them to treat me like a criminal. Marcus studied her face, his eyes firm. I'll handle it. Olivia gave a bitter laugh. You haven't even told me who you really are. How are you going to handle it? For a brief moment in that cold corridor, their eyes locked hers, filled with despair, his concealing an approaching storm. Marcus spoke slowly. I'm the one sent here to change this place. And trust me, I won't let you be buried by their lies. Olivia stared at him, her eyes wet but glimmering with a fragile spark of hope. Then do it fast, she whispered. Because they're closing in. That night in his hotel apartment overlooking the Chicago River, Marcus sat before his laptop. The glow of the screen reflected on his face, steady but strained. On the table were rows of data files, altered emails, backdated reports, unauthorized logins, all bearing the fingerprints of Richard Hale. He opened a new file and typed a command to his team at Read Capital Target Hale. Confirmed internal manipulation. Prepare soft counter-operation within 48 hours. Keep legal audit team on standby. He paused, staring out the window where the city lights shimmered across the water like 1,000 watchful eyes. A gust of wind slipped through the crack in the window, sharp and cold. He whispered to himself, All right, Richard. You just declared war. The next morning, before the sun climbed high, Marcus returned to the building, but this time no one recognized him. He walked through the lobby in a deep navy suit and crisp white shirt, no longer the delivery man from before. His eyes were cold, focused his stride straight as a ruler. The guard nodded in greeting. The receptionist smiled politely. The same woman who once ignored him now spoke softly. Good morning, Mr. Reed. He simply nodded, stepping into the elevator. The steel doors closed, reflecting the face of a man about to reclaim dignity for everyone ever dismissed. On the 22nd floor, the executive meeting was underway. Richard stood at the head of the table, reciting words like restructuring efficiency transparency. But when the door opened, his voice faltered. Marcus Reed walked in. No one knew who he was, only that his presence drew the air out of the room. He took a seat near the end of the table, opened his notebook and said calmly, I'd like to observe if you don't mind. Richard swallowed hard, his smile stiffening. Of course, and you are the one here to make sure this meeting isn't just for show. The room went silent. Marcus's eyes swept over every face before settling on Richard. Both men understood. The game had officially begun. That morning's meeting took place in a glass-walled room on the 22nd floor, where sunlight bounced off the transparent panels, making everything look brighter than it truly was. But beneath that polished glow hung a dense atmosphere, as if everyone in the room was breathing the same fear. Richard Hale stood before the screen, speaking in a steady, practiced rhythm, pushing out familiar corporate phrases, as if every syllable had been rehearsed: structural transformation, sustainable growth, a culture of transparency. Each word was wrapped in the sugary coating of professionalism, but to Marcus Reed there was something else beneath it, the stench of deceit. Sitting at the far end of the table, Marcus stayed silent. His calm eyes swept across the faces of those around him, faces that had mastered the choreography of synchronized nods, polite smiles and perfectly timed silences. This wasn't a meeting. It was a performance. As I mentioned earlier, Richard concluded, we need to ensure that all internal data remains completely secure. There have been a few minor incidents involving information leaks, and I've ordered an internal audit. Marcus lifted his head. Minor incidents. Richard raised an eyebrow, keeping his tone civil. Ah, yes, just a standard procedure, nothing serious. And the employee called into HR yesterday. Olivia Brooks, was that just procedure too? A low murmur rippled through the room. Richard tried to hold his smile. You know about that. I know more than you think, Marcus said slowly and clearly. I know who ordered the investigation, and I know who's been using fear as a management strategy. The air froze. Some executives pretended to type on their laptops, their hands trembling slightly. Richard's grip on his pen tightened, his voice smooth but icy. And who exactly are you to be asking these questions? Marcus met his gaze without flinching. The man who invested $3.2 billion to see just how transparent your leadership really is. The room erupted in stunned silence. A few executives exchanged panicked looks, their eyes wide. Richard stood frozen for a moment, then forced out a short, uneasy laugh. Ah, I see. A surprise inspection. Very creative. Marcus remained calm. Not an inspection, Richard. An observation. He stood, and the sunlight from the glass walls flared across his face. I wanted to see how this company treats people who don't wear the title of financial gentleman. And now I've seen enough. He walked out, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like gravity had shifted. 2 hours later, rumors spread like wildfire throughout headquarters. He's the new owner. No way. I thought he was just a secondary investor. I told you there was something different about him. It's the eyes. Meanwhile, Richard Hale sat in his office. Arms crossed his expression, sharp as a blade. Humiliation clung to every breath he took. In over 20 years, no one had ever dared to embarrass him in front of his own board. And that man, the one in the hoodie, was now sitting at the top of the pyramid. His phone buzzed. Greg, it's Gavin, came the gravelly voice of Gavin Ellis, a member of the board. This morning's story is spreading for vast. What's your move? Richard exhaled slowly. I won't let him play the moral hero with me. If he wants a war, I'll give him one. Meaning I'll make him lose credibility. I don't have to touch him. All I need to do is change the story. That afternoon, Marcus walked through the lobby. The receptionist, the same woman who had once dismissed him, greeted him with a nervous smile. Good afternoon, Mr. Reed. He paused, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment. You don't have to fear me, he said softly. Just don't be afraid of kindness. She froze, unsure how to respond, and he walked away, leaving behind a sentence that felt like a quiet confession. That evening, Olivia received an email. Hello, Olivia. Tomorrow morning's meeting has been cancelled. No need to attend. No reason. No explanation. She stared blankly at the screen as exhaustion spread through her chest like a dark stain. She was used to being excluded from meetings, but this time felt different. This time she knew she was being targeted. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. This is Brooks. Marcus's voice came through low and steady. They've started their counter-attack. She held her breath. What do you mean they won't go after you openly? They'll make you doubt yourself first. Then what should I do? Stay firm, don't sign anything. Don't delete any emails. And don't be afraid. Silence. Then Olivia whispered, Do you trust me? Marcus answered instantly, his voice solid as stone. I trust you more than anyone sitting on the 20th floor." Across town, in the private dining room of an upscale restaurant, Richard and Gavin clinked their glasses. "We can't go at him head on," Gavin said. "But we can make the shareholders question him." Richard nodded. "We twist the narrative, leak a story about financial irregularities, add a hint about an inappropriate relationship between Marcus and that employee Brooks." Gavin laughed. "Perfect. The media loves that." Their crystal glasses chimed cold and deliberate. A new plan was born, subtle, dirty, and dangerous. Late that night, Marcus returned to his hotel. The room was dark, lit only by the warm glow of a desk lamp reflecting off stacks of files. He opened one folder, staring at a photo of Olivia during her presentation, eyes bright with confidence, lips pressed together in quiet resilience. He brushed his hand lightly over the image, his gaze softening. He remembered his mother, the woman who'd been fired for daring to challenge her boss. "It's all right, son," she once said. "In some places, silence is the price of survival." But he had sworn that day he'd never let that happen again. Never let anyone like his mother or Olivia be buried under the shadows of power. The next morning the company shook. A headline exploded online: "New owner of Stone and Pierce accused of favoritism toward female employee, internal review underway." Below it was a photo Marcus in his hoodie, standing in the lobby, eyes cast downward, edited to look like a man sneaking through forbidden halls. The communications department went into chaos. Richard walked in, his voice calm but chilling. "Control the comments. No statements. Let the rumors breathe." Outside, the wind howled against the glass, carrying whispers through the air. Inside, Olivia sat motionless, staring at the headline, her heartbeat breaking with each word. Somewhere else, Marcus Reed closed his laptop. He wasn't angry. He simply whispered like an oath, "The storm they created will be the place where I rebuild the light." The power struggle had truly begun, and this time he wasn't just watching anymore. The sky over Chicago that day was soaked in a heavy shade of grey. News of the so-called ethics scandal spread like a virus from the top floors of Stone and Pierce Financial Group to the corner coffee shops where employees whispered over their morning drinks. People talked in low voices, their curious glances slicing through glass hallways like blades. On phone screens, dozens of articles filled social media feeds. New owner accused of favoritism toward female subordinate, secret affair inside Stone and Pierce. And there it was, the photo of Marcus in his hoodie, edited into the symbol of a two-faced man. Lies traveled faster than truth. But on the top floor, the man who had crafted those lies was smiling. Richard Hale stood by his office window, a glass of red wine in his hand. Across from him, Gavin Ellis reread the headline one more time, his voice rough with satisfaction. "The public loves stories like this," Gavin said, "especially when they get to see the powerful dragged down." Richard set his glass down, his tone cold as steel. "He thought he could teach me morality. I'll teach him reality." He turned toward the large wall monitor, displaying falsified emails, doctored financial records, and neatly edited messages between Olivia Brooks and an anonymous source. Each piece looked real enough to plant doubt, but fake enough to avoid proof. "Do we have everything Richard asked?" Gavin smiled and opened his briefcase. "All set. When the board meets next week, we'll propose an ethics investigation into Marcus Reed and a temporary suspension from his executive role. A necessary move to protect the company's reputation." "Perfect," Richard replied, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. and Brooks. She's been transferred to the data department. No one even remembers she once sat in the main conference room. Richard nodded slowly. Good. Let them disappear in silence like everyone who dares to step out of line. Meanwhile, Olivia Brooks sat in the basement data wing, where the only light came from flickering fluorescent tubes. The narrow room smelled of paper dust and recycled air. She stared at the lines of code scrolling across her screen, each one pulsing like the heartbeat of injustice growing inside her chest. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper, cold and impersonal. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to the Archives and Data Department. No reason. No farewell. Olivia pressed her lips together, her hands trembling. She had never felt smaller. The door creaked open. A shadow stepped inside Marcus. But today he wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up his face, tired but his eyes still burning with purpose. "Are you all right?" She looked up, her voice hoarse. "Do you really want the truth?" Marcus stayed silent. She gave a bitter laugh. "I've been called a spy, stripped of my access, buried down here like I don't exist. And all because I spoke to you. This isn't your fault." "No, but I'm the one paying for it." In that moment, Marcus felt the weight in his chest grow heavy. He knew what was happening to Olivia was the very reflection of what he'd come to change. A system that didn't care about right or wrong, only about obedience. He placed an envelope on the desk. "Open it." Inside were pages of system logs, timestamps of altered files, traces of Richard Hale's admin account and metadata, proving the leaked files had been edited after Olivia had logged out. Olivia's eyes widened. "Where did you get this?" Marcus answered slowly. "I never lost access to the truth." That night in his Riverside apartment, Marcus held an online meeting with his investigation team. The glow from the screen lit his face in halves, one side bright, one side dark, like the battle he was caught in. "We have enough evidence to strike back," said Evelyn Chun, the head of legal. "If we go public now, Richard will face an immediate inquiry." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We don't react when they expect it. We stay quiet. Let them think I'm weak." "But your reputation—" "It's not my reputation. I'm protecting Evelyn. It's the truth." He turned off the screen and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered, as if nothing had changed. But he knew that somewhere below, the rumors were eating away at people's faith. And he, the man who once chose silence, was now facing the hardest lesson of all: the truth does not defend itself unless someone dares to stand for it. The next day, the board officially suspended Marcus Reed from direct operational authority, pending an investigation into conflict of interest. Newspapers splashed his image everywhere. Marcus leaving headquarters, head slightly bowed, collar up, surrounded by a sea of reporters. No one knew he wasn't bowing in shame, but in restraint. In the lobby, employees who once whispered about him now looked on with a mix of fear and curiosity. Some lowered their eyes as he passed, others turned away. Only Olivia stood quietly in the far corner, her eyes red from sleepless nights. When their gazes met, she shook her head gently, an apology unspoken. Marcus gave her a faint smile, sharp as a blade. He didn't blame them. He only thought, they're not wrong. They've just been taught to be afraid. That night, in the stillness of his apartment, he stood by the window, watching the city fade under a veil of fog. In the distance, the stone and Pierce Tower glowed brightly, its light not a symbol of success, but of arrogance barely holding together. Then his phone lit up, an anonymous message appeared, sent through the company's internal system. We found inconsistencies in the audit logs Hale sent to the board. If you want, I can help. At the bottom were 2 initials OB. Marcus smiled. Olivia Brooks hadn't surrendered, and he knew the truth was beginning to surface again. He sat down at his desk, opened his notebook, and wrote 1 line in bold, deliberate strokes. They want to write their story. Fine. I'll rewrite the ending. The streetlights outside cast a golden hue across his face, calm, resolute. In his eyes no longer burned the patience of an observer, but the fire of a man ready to strike back. The storm was turning, and this time it carried justice with it. 12 days. That was how long Marcus Reed had vanished from the media, from social networks, and from the towering glass walls of Stone and Pierce. The press assumed he had stepped down with dignity. Financial forums labeled him a fallen star. But what they didn't understand was this: when the world gets loud, silence becomes the sharpest weapon. In a high-rise apartment overlooking the Chicago River, the computer lights burned through the night. On the screens, hundreds of data lines flickered like veins, carrying the lifeblood of evidence. Marcus sat still in the middle of the room, his eyes fixed on the reports being processed. It's confirmed, Mr. Reed said. Evelyn Chun, head of internal investigations, her voice steady through the video feed. The entire previous quarter's financial report was manipulated. The altered data was accessed using Richard Hale's admin account. We also have the original backup logs and pre-edited files. Marcus nodded slightly, his voice deep and cold. And the proof that Olivia was framed. Here Evelyn said, sliding a flash drive toward him. The timestamp shows the file was edited almost an hour after she logged out. The metadata confirms it. Marcus clenched his fist. Good. We don't release anything yet. Let them believe they've already won. He walked to the window. Outside, the city glowed like a fortress of light, but Marcus knew that radiance only existed to hide the darkness beneath. Across the city, Richard Hale sat in his private office, feet propped on the desk, wearing a satisfied grin. Tomorrow's press conference would be the final nail in Marcus Reed's coffin. He sipped his wine, watching the news replay on his television. Since Reed's suspension, investor confidence in Stone and Pierce has stabilized under the temporary leadership of Richard Hale. Experts call the shift a new era of trust for the firm. Trust? Richard laughed softly. Trust was something he had never needed, only control. The door creaked open. Gavin Ellis entered carrying a folder. Good news, he said. The board is ready to vote no confidence on Reed next week. The press already has their articles drafted. All we need to do is sign. Richard flipped through the pages, smiling in satisfaction. And Brooks quiet. Probably scared. Like everyone else. Perfect. Richard replied, pouring another glass of wine. Silence is the most elegant form of submission. But that night, Olivia Brooks did not stay silent. In her small apartment on the outskirts of the city, she sat before the documents Marcus had once handed her: system logs, access records, proof of tampering. She knew she held something that could either save them both or destroy her completely. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. If you still believe in justice, meet me at the co-working space by the river at 8 in the morning. Bring everything. M. She looked out the window. The February wind howled through the skyline, cold and relentless. She knew this wasn't just a meeting, it was a crossroads. The next morning, at a rented workspace overlooking the river, Marcus waited. He wore a dark sweater, no suit, no tie. His face looked tired, but his eyes burned with clarity. When Olivia walked in, she barely recognized the man the media had tried to destroy. He looked calm, too calm. "I thought you were gone," she said quietly. "No," Marcus replied, his tone low and steady. I was silent. There's a difference between disappearing and preparing. He turned his laptop toward her. On the screen was an internal investigative interface linking a web of evidence, Richard's emails to Gavin, altered financial reports and recordings of private meetings. "How long have you been gathering all this?" Olivia asked. "Since the day I first walked into that lobby," Marcus said. "I didn't come to audit the numbers. I came to audit the soul of this company." Olivia stared at the files in awe. Each document was a blade, cutting through the illusion of power. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You even have recordings of their conversations." Marcus nodded. "I placed a device in the executive conference room. Now we have everything." His gaze softened. "They wanted to make me a spectacle. But now they'll be the lesson." She took a breath. "What are you going to do?" Marcus smiled, a thin, calm smile that carried quiet danger. "I'm not here to clear my name. I'm here to reset the standard." He placed an envelope before her. It was embossed with the company's logo. "Quarterly Shareholders Conference, 9 a.m. Monday. Tomorrow," Marcus said. "I'll be there." Olivia looked at him, torn between fear and admiration. "They won't let you walk in that room." "That's fine," he said softly, "because this time I'm not walking in alone." She looked down at the folder. In the corner, handwritten in ink, were the words, "You were never alone." "MR." Her eyes trembled. She nodded. "All right. Let me present the first slide." That afternoon, the Stone and Pierce headquarters buzzed with preparation for the shareholders' meeting. On stage, Richard rehearsed his speech one last time, his lips mouthing the words stability, transparency, efficiency. Every syllable sounded like a lie he had perfected. Behind the curtain, Gavin whispered, "The cameras are ready. Remember talk about the company's future. Don't mention Marcus. Let the public forget him." Richard smirked. "Trust me. By tomorrow morning they'll remember me the man who saved Stone and Pierce." But in another part of the city, Marcus and Olivia were preparing in their own way. Evelyn Chon had just sent them an external hard drive containing all the evidence compiled into a single presentation file labeled Exhibit A. Marcus held it in his hand, his eyes settling on the title, Project Integrity, The Reckoning. He whispered to himself like a promise. Tomorrow isn't just a meeting. It's the day light returns. Night fell over the city. The river shimmered like a long mirror, reflecting the skyline. Marcus stood by his window, watching the Stone and Pierce. Towers' lights flicker over the water. He remembered that first morning, the day a security guard told him to use the back entrance, the day the entire system judged him by a hoodie. Now he would walk back into that same building, but not to observe, to deliver judgment. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "Justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs one person brave enough to stand. And tomorrow, that person would be him." Monday morning. Chicago wore the pale silver gray of early winter, but inside the Grand Armitage Hotel the air was blazing. The quarterly shareholders' conference of Stone and Pierce Financial Group was about to begin an event the investment world was already calling the Day of Stability. Reporters swarmed the lobby. Cameras were positioned across the grand hall, and at the center of the stage, Richard Hale stood ready for the most carefully choreographed performance of his life. He walked between rows packed with shareholders and journalists, the deep red of his tie standing out against his expensive suit. Every step he took was a declaration, I am in control. To Richard, this day was more than a meeting. It was a ritual, the final act to erase Marcus Reed from the company's history. On the second floor of the hotel, inside a closed meeting room, Marcus sat with Olivia Brooks and Evelyn Chun. The cold blue glow of the laptop lit their faces, making them look like soldiers preparing for the last battle. Are you sure about this? Evelyn asked, her voice firm but calm. Marcus didn't look up. More sure than ever. They won't realize what's happening until it's too late. Olivia's hands clenched. If this fails, you'll lose everything. And I, Marcus, interrupted his tone, low but steady. You've already lost enough. Now it's their turn. He stood, pulling on his black coat, his gaze fixed on the distant skyline where the stone and Pierce Tower stood tall and cold. 6 months ago they said I didn't belong there. Today I'll walk back in not to find my place, but to restore justice to its place. 9 o'clock. The conference hall gleamed with light, hundreds of people rising to applaud as Richard Hale stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice polished like a politician's. This past year has tested us all. But through perseverance, Stone and Pierce has overcome crisis and is now on a path of renewed growth. Today, we celebrate not just financial success, but trust. The audience clapped politely. Cameras panned across the room. Richard lifted his glass of water and smiled. And we must not forget those who stood beside us, the colleagues who upheld the true values of this company. He never finished the sentence. A voice rang out from the back of the room. True values. Then show them the truth. The murmur spread like a wave. Heads turned. At the end of the aisle, Marcus Reed was walking forward, tall, composed, his eyes burning beneath the lights. Beside him walked Olivia Brooks, a silver USB drive in her hand. Richard froze. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Marcus Gavin Ellis whispered under his breath. What the hell is happening? Marcus stepped onto the stage. His voice rang out deep and unwavering. Apologies for the unannounced visit, but I think there are a few things everyone should see before we start talking about trust. He turned to the technician. Play the screen. The massive LED wall behind Richard lit up with a title that read, Exhibit, a Internal Communications Record. The hall fell silent. The first image appeared an email exchange between Richard and Gavin. We need to modify the financial data before the quarterly review. Label it as revised input. Blame Brooks if necessary. Then came an audio clip, Richard's voice clear and unmistakable. Let him think he's won. That guy's just a black man in a hoodie. He'll destroy himself. The murmurs swelled, then dissolved into a heavy silence. Marcus stood straight, his tone cutting like steel. This is how they talk about the people they call colleagues. And this, he nodded to Olivia. She pressed a key. The screen switched to footage from the internal security camera, showing Richard and Gavin together, plotting their false narrative about Marcus's so-called favoritism. Gavin's voice echoed across the room. We'll use Brooks as bait. Make people think Reed is weak because of a woman. Perfect, Richard replied. Nothing kills a man's credibility faster than a scandal about morality. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Shareholders exchanged horrified looks. The confidence that once filled the room had turned into shock. Marcus stepped closer to Richard. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner. You said I didn't belong here. But maybe it's you who never belonged in this company. Richard scrambled to his feet, gripping the microphone, his voice shaking. This is fake fabricated. He made this up. Marcus cut him off. I have more than 80 verified logs authenticated by 3 independent sources. If you'd like to speak further, I invite you to do so under oath." The room exploded. Whispers, shouts, the scrape of chairs, the clicking of camera shutters. But amid the chaos, Marcus stood, still eyes, steady, his voice lowering into something almost solemn. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came to remind us that respect cannot be faked, and power was never meant to crush the truth." He turned toward the audience, his words softer but stronger. This company once prided itself on its culture. But today that culture has been poisoned by those who treat others as less than human. We can stay silent, or we can start again. The silence that followed was absolute. Then one pair of hands began to clap. An elderly female shareholder in the 3rd row, her eyes bright with conviction. Then another, and another. The applause swelled into thunder, joined by the flash of cameras and the rush of voices. Richard Hale sank into his chair, pale and defeated. Ruth Ellis, chair of the board, rose to her feet, her voice sharp as glass. "Mr. Hale, as head of the board, I am ordering you to leave this room immediately. A formal investigation begins today." 2 security officers approached. Richard looked up at Marcus, his face twisted with anger and fear. "You think you've won?" Marcus replied quietly, almost a whisper. "No, Richard. I haven't won. The company just stopped losing." The meeting ended to a storm of applause. Marcus stood still, watching as people filed out of the hall. Part of him. Light, part of him. Heavy. Olivia approached, a tired smile on her face. "We did it." Marcus shook his head slightly, his eyes distant. "No. We've only begun." Outside the glass walls, the midday light poured in, reflecting across their faces. For the first time, Stone and Pierce wasn't just looking at its leader. It was looking at its conscience. That afternoon, as the conference came to an end, the last rays of sunlight spilled across the glass walls of the Grand Armitage Hotel, gleaming like reflections of the storm that had just passed. Among the crowd of reporters and shareholders still lingering, Marcus Reed stepped through the main doors in silence. He neither spoke nor smiled. The flash of cameras flickered around him, but the dazzling light didn't blind him, perhaps because he'd long learned how to look straight into darkness. Behind him, Richard Hale was escorted out through a side exit, his face ashen, his steps unsteady between 2 security officers. The arrogance that once shaped his stride had collapsed into a broken shadow. An old era was fading, and Marcus understood that every empire falls not because of its enemies, but because of its pride. That night, the offices of Reed Capital Holdings glowed late into the evening. Beyond the tall glass windows overlooking the river, the city lights shimmered like streaks of fire. Marcus sat with his legal team, reviewing every line of every report, every record of the board. "The news is spreading fast," Evelyn Chun said firmly. "Stone and Pierce stock is up 12% in just 4 hours. The major shareholders are asking you to return as CEO." Marcus stayed quiet. He didn't smile. He simply signed the papers before him. "Before I go back," he said, "I want to make sure of one thing, that the change isn't just in leadership, but in the way we see people." Evelyn nodded, and Olivia Marcus looked up, his expression softening. "She's living proof of what this company forgot, that real talent doesn't need a golden business card." At that same moment, Olivia Brooks sat in her small apartment, her phone vibrating non-stop. Her inbox overflowed with messages, congratulations, interview requests, apologies from people who once turned their backs on her. But she didn't respond. She just looked out the window where the season's first snow was falling, quite quiet like forgiveness itself. The door creaked open. Marcus stepped in, unannounced, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. "Heard you skipped the thank you party," he said. Olivia shrugged, a faint smile on her lips, though her eyes were heavy. "I'm not good at pretending to be comfortable around people who once wanted me gone." Marcus sat beside her, handing her a cup. "Then let me sit here with you in silence." For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind outside and the warmth from their cups filled the room. Then Olivia asked softly, "You don't hate them?" Marcus gazed at the space ahead. "Hate changes nothing. Justice does. I don't need revenge. I just need them to see themselves." She was quiet, eyes glistening. "You know," she whispered, "the day they sent me to the basement, I thought I was just another number in their system. But when you showed up, I realized sometimes all it takes is one person who dares to see differently, and the whole world starts to change its color." Marcus smiled, a rare, gentle smile. "It wasn't me who changed the world's color. It was you who reminded me why I started." A few days later, Stone & Pierce Financial officially announced its new appointments. Mr. Marcus Reed, named Chief Executive Officer. Ms. Olivia Brooks, appointed Director of Strategic Innovation. The headlines spread across the media, the company reborn under new leadership, from basement girl to boardroom leader. In his office on the 30th floor, Marcus looked at the new plaque on the wall, "Integrity First." He said nothing, only tapped his fingers lightly on the word integrity, as if sealing a promise. On Olivia's first day back at the company, the once cold hallways were filled with greetings. The same people who used to pass her without notice now smiled, some even bowed their heads. She returned their smiles, not with pride, not with payback, but with the quiet grace of someone who had walked through the storm and chosen forgiveness. When she entered the conference room, Marcus was already there, standing by the glass wall, overlooking the city. "You're here," he said, without turning. "Feels strange," she replied. "I used to sit in this room just to take notes and stay silent." Marcus turned to face her, the morning light glinting across his face. "Today you'll speak, and this time the whole room will listen." In his first week back, Marcus made a decision that stunned the entire company. He abolished the old Leadership Potential Program, a system once reserved for those who fit the image, and replaced it with a new initiative called The Bridge, a fair and open development program for all employees. "I don't just want to build a company," he said at the all-staff meeting. "I want to build trust, and the first bridge we build will connect those who've never had a chance to be heard." Applause erupted. Some bowed their heads out of guilt or perhaps humility, but in their eyes something had changed awareness. One weekend evening, Marcus stood on the rooftop of the building, the wind tugging at his coat. Olivia walked up beside him, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Hard to believe," she said, looking at the city lights below. "A year ago they wanted me gone. Now they call me the face of innovation." Marcus chuckled softly, his gaze distant. "The world loves to glorify what it once rejected. But what matters isn't what they call you. It's that you stayed true to yourself." She turned toward him, half smiling, half sad. "Do you ever think you'll find peace?" "No," Marcus replied, "because justice never sleeps, but at least tonight it stands where it belongs." A strong gust of wind swept through, tossing Olivia's hair back. Beneath the city's glow, the two stood side by side, not as boss and employee, but as 2 survivors of the same storm. Marcus raised his glass, gently, clinking it against hers. to those who stand up, even when the world tells them to sit down." Olivia's voice trembled as she replied, "And to those who dare to see the real worth in others." They fell silent, the only sounds the wind and the faint clinking of glass. Below them, the stone and pierced tower shone brightly in the night, not as a monument of pride, but as a beacon of change. Marcus looked down, whispering softly almost to himself. "The storm has passed, but justice will keep blowing." 6 months later, the city of Chicago had turned to spring. The Stone and Pierce Financial Building shimmered under the new sunlight, but it wasn't just the exterior that had changed, it was the soul within. From the boardrooms to the hallways to the cafe on the ground floor, there were no longer those judging eyes or condescending laughs. In their place were conversations of equality ideas being heard, and people finally being seen. Marcus Reed stood by the window on the 30th floor, watching the stream of people rushing through the streets below. In his hand was a photograph, taken that first morning he had walked into the building's lobby wearing an old hoodie. He smiled faintly. How strange, he thought, that in just 6 months an entire empire could change direction. The door opened, and Olivia Brooks stepped in holding a folder. "The results of the internal survey are in," she said, her smile gentle but full of pride. "The percentage of employees who feel respected and heard has risen from 42% to 91%. We're on the right path." Marcus looked at her, his expression kind but thoughtful. "Not us, Olivia. Everyone." "I just turned on the light. They're the ones who chose to step out of the dark." She sat down, placing the folder on the desk. "You know what makes me happiest isn't the title. It's when a young intern told me the other day, 'Ms. Brooks, I think now everyone really has the same chance.'" Marcus chuckled softly, his eyes glowing with warmth. "If someone that young can believe in fairness, then I think we've already won." Outside, the sky was clear and blue. From the high floor, little kites floated above the city, like reminders that freedom doesn't come from power, it comes from truth. Olivia moved closer to the window, looking down at the building's lobby. "Do you remember the day the security guard stopped you at the entrance?" Marcus laughed quietly, his smile calm and deep as the wind. "I remember. That was the day I learned respect can't be bought with money. It only exists when we choose to see others as human beings." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the soft sound of the wind and the sunlight spilling across the desk broke the silence, where a small plaque sat neatly in place. "Dignity walks in wearing anything." Olivia looked at the inscription and said softly, "You know they engraved that sentence on the wall of the main lobby?" Marcus smiled, turning to her. "I know. But what makes me happier is that they didn't put my name under it. Because those words don't belong to me." "Then who do they belong to?" she asked. "To everyone who was ever looked down on, but still chose kindness." The afternoon light streamed through the glass, wrapping around them, both the two people who had once been doubted, dismissed, and now stood at the summit, not because of power, but because of integrity. Marcus looked out over the city, his voice deep and steady. "The world doesn't change because of promises. It changes because of those who keep them, even when no one believes." The final sunset of the quarter painted the city in a warm shade of amber. On the rooftop of the Stone and Pierce building, Marcus Reed leaned against the railing, the soft wind brushing through his hair as his eyes followed the fading horizon. Beside him, Olivia Brooks carried 2 cups of coffee a quiet ritual they had kept since their days working together in the data basement. "What do you think will happen to the company in the future?" she asked, her voice low and thoughtful. Marcus smiled gently, his gaze still fixed on the distance. "It will change, and someday it will make mistakes again. But as long as there's someone brave enough to speak the truth, it will keep living right." A warm silence settled between them. Below, employees were leaving for the day, their laughter carried upward by the wind. The building that had once been a symbol of cold authority now pulsed with the warmth of humanity. Olivia's voice softened. "You've taught them so much." Marcus shook his head. "No, I only reminded them that respect isn't a reward. It's a beginning." He turned to her, his eyes sincere. "You know, Olivia, what makes me proudest isn't becoming chairman. It's seeing people stand up for themselves." She smiled, eyes glistening. "And you, Marcus, were the first to do it." The wind swept across the rooftop, carrying with it the metallic scent of the city and a faint sweetness of freedom. Marcus looked at the lights beginning to flicker on below and said softly, almost in a whisper, "Justice isn't a blinding light. It's a small flame we must keep alive even when our hands begin to tremble." On the glass wall behind them, the reflection of the fading sun blurred across the words etched in silver "Dignity walks in wearing anything." From the perspective of a specialist in ethical leadership and corporate culture, the journey of Marcus Reed is not just a story about power. It is proof of transformation when integrity becomes the foundation of every decision. He did not win because of wealth or status, but because he had the courage to stand still in the storm to protect what was right. And when a person chooses kindness over revenge, they not only save themselves, but also those lost within the system. This story reminds us that justice is not a sudden burst of light, but a small flame kept alive by courage every single day. If you believe that respect and human dignity can still change the world, please like this video to spread that belief. Subscribe to the channel to never miss the stories where justice shines quietly in the dark, and comment the phrase that reflects your faith. Keep integrity.